I'm really excited because this thing is getting an upgrade. And both of the jobs that I wanted to crack on with have been an absolute flop. Next, I grabbed the Kent Europe silly gasket because it was time to get bodgy, which was only finger tight. Nut missing off the bolt for the alternator. Banjo fitting was on the wrong way round. Second pad wouldn't go in. Hello and welcome to this video. I'm Marcus Hayes and today I'm heading over to my other garage to do some bits on this old banger. This is of course my favourite car, Esther the ST170 powered Mk1 Escort. And one of the things that I'm going to be doing on this today, I'm really excited because this thing is getting an upgrade. Thanks to a guy called John Poole who gave me some parts when we were at the Classic Ford show recently. Massive thanks again to you, John. But yeah, I've got at least one thing that I've been meaning to do for ages on this thing. Also want to do an oil change and revisit something that I did recently. So yeah, I'm going to get myself to the garage, get this thing jacked up and crack on with a couple of more boring bits off camera. But I will of course fill you in on everything after I've done it. And then we can start giving this thing a really cool upgrade. All right, so I've been around here a good few hours. As you can see, I've got Esther jacked up at the front at the moment, and both of the jobs that I wanted to crack on with before picking the camera back up have been an absolute flop. Now, we'll talk about what I've been doing at the front end in a minute, but at the back end, I revisited the issue I've been having lately with this car with the O-rings on the rear wheel bearings leaking diff oil. Now, loads of you guys got in touch when I was messing around with this last time to tell me that you can get some better quality rear wheel bearings that don't have the O-ring. You know, they're the perfect size so that they seal inside the actual casing without the need of an O-ring. But those bearings happen to be really expensive, so yeah, I'm trying to get these ones to work, and I did actually order some new O-rings from eBay. They came all the way from China, and here are said O-rings. These are 62mm outer diameter, and they're 2mm thick. And the reason I got that size was because the outer diameter of a rear wheel bearing on a Mk1 or a Mk2 Escort is 62mm. But these O-rings are actually too big, I found, when I had the half shaft out earlier. And basically, I think I need to get ones that are a couple of mil smaller because these are a perfect loose fit, but they're not the right size. Now, I actually only had the passenger side apart because once I realised I had the wrong O-rings, I didn't bother diving into the driver's side. But whilst I was round the passenger side, I opened up the hole on the brake backing plate a bit more than I did before, just because I've now got a brand new flap wheel for the drill. So that should mean that when I do actually get the right sized O-rings, yeah, it'll be easier to push the half shaft into the axle without the brake backing plate disturbing the O-ring on the rear wheel bearing. Now, around the front of the car, what I wanted to do before I started diving into changing the brakes on this thing was to give Esther a well overdue oil and oil filter change. But when I was under the front of the car, just about to crack off the sump plug, I noticed something wrong. Let me get under there and show you. So I keep putting off doing this oil change because I have suspected up until very recently that the sump gasket needed replacing, although in the last video I kind of confirmed that it didn't need replacing. But today I've noticed a load of oil on the bottom of the sump. You can see it there, you can sort of see where it's come from. And after having a look under here quite extensively, I actually think that it might be coming from the dipstick because we've got oil coming through the RF there of the retro forward engine mount. We've got oil all around here. Yeah, it's all hanging off of the bottom of that engine mount. I don't think it's that breather box gasket that I changed before. But yeah, it's basically all around the dipstick area. You know, along the sump gasket, it kind of looks absolutely fine. I have noticed a little bit over here though, to be fair. So maybe that's coming off the front of the sump gasket. But for the most part, the sump gasket looks fine, but there is a load of oil all round where that dipstick tube is. So, you know, I don't want to give this thing an oil change until I've confirmed whether this thing needs a new sump gasket or not, because when you change the sump gasket, you're basically throwing away all of the oil. And if we look around the driver's side of the engine, I can definitely see traces of oil here, and you can see where they've run down from. But again, it doesn't look like it's the sump gasket. I think it's actually from that oil pressure switch. This actual oil pressure switch here is for the light in my aftermarket dash, if I remember rightly. But there's another one in this T-piece thing, which is for the gauge in my dash. But yeah, you can see underneath all this T-piece, there's oil. So it looks like that might be leaking as well. But again, I'm glad that it looks like it's not the sump gasket. So I think what I'm actually going to do is solve those leaks and then keep an eye on it. And yeah, we'll just see if I'm going to just do an oil change very soon, because it is due, or just dive into changing the sump gasket at some point in the near future. So the O-ring on this dipstick tube is still intact, but this was how it was when I pulled it out. Now I don't know whether it's sort of wiggled its way off whilst I was pulling it out, or whether maybe it was just in there like that, and maybe that's why it's been leaking. Now, because this is very close to that breather box, the leak that I had before that I thought was from that breather box when I changed the gasket before, maybe it was this all along, if this O-ring hasn't been situated on here properly. I don't know. I was kind of expecting to pull this out and the O-ring be missing or split, but that's not the case. Now, I do have a load of generic O-rings. Let's see if I've got one that's the same size. Because to be honest, I'm sure in the past with these Zetec's, I've tried to use like a generic O-ring and they just don't seal as good as these original Ford green ones. So I'm kind of reluctant to change this, seeing as it is still there, and seeing as, you know, the fact that it's not on there properly might be what was causing the leak all along. So yeah, I think I'm just going to send it with this green one on there. Make sure it's in place. Well, I have just noticed that there are some like sort of chunks out of it, so maybe it's not wise to put this back in. All right, decision has been made, and I've decided to put this aftermarket O-ring on after all. But I'm going to do something that many would consider as a bodge to give it a better chance of remaining leak-free. So let's get this refitted. I grabbed the Kent Europe brake cleaner and cleaned up the oil from around the dipstick hole. I then put a small amount of grease on the dipstick O-ring to help it slide in. Then I refitted the dipstick tube and screwed it back to the head with the Allen key bolt. Next, I grabbed the Kent Europe silly gasket because it was time to get bodgy. I squirted a load of the silly gasket around where the dipstick tube goes into the block, and then did my best to spread it all the way around the dipstick tube with my fingers. Lovely job. It was time to crack on with the oil switch leak next. I got my deep 24mm socket on the switch, but I was unable to get my 22mm spanner on the T-piece. Anyway, I hooked up a bar and a ratchet and found that the switch was only finger tight, which might explain why it was leaking. I put some fresh PTFE on and screwed it back to the block, and whilst I was cleaning, I noticed a nut missing off the bolt for the alternator, so I chucked a new one on. Hello, into a new day. Now, shortly after I fixed, hopefully, those oil leaks on Esther's engine yesterday, I had to shoot off from the garage, but I did bring her new front brake calipers with me so that I can fit those today round at the garage here at home. Now, before we get into that, I want to let you guys know that my company, Petrolhead Style, have launched a brand new product, magnets. I would call them fridge magnets, but I'm not allowed to have car magnets on our fridge here at home, but I am working on it. But basically, all the really cool sticker designs that we've got at petrolheadstyle.com are now also available as a magnet. And these are really cool, flexible, vinyl-like magnets, which means if you drop them on the floor, they won't smash like the ceramic magnets do. So head over to Petrolhead Style to check those out. Don't forget, join the mailing list at petrolheadstyle.com so you can benefit from our competitions to win free products. We're actually running a Lotus Cortina Mk1 mug and sticker competition at the moment, and we always send out discount codes and stuff to you guys that are on our mailing list. So definitely join the mailing list at petrolheadstyle.com and check out the new magnets as well as all the other super cool car themed products that we've got available. We're actually going to be launching a brand new design really soon as well, which I'm really excited for. All right, so already made a bit of a head start. Got the passenger side front wheel off. And as you can see, this car at the moment runs M16 calipers, which have been spaced so they're suitable for the vented discs. And this is basically the setup that would have been fitted as standard to a 2.8 litre Mark III Capri. I've also got the same brake setup on Maud, my Maud Mk1 Escort, and she actually has some Capri 2.8 blue Bilstein front legs as well. Now both cars have been upgraded with the drilled and grooved vented front discs, and both cars run EBC yellow stuff brake pads. But yeah, I'm hoping that the new brake setup will be suitable for these discs, but we're going to be switching out these M16 calipers for the 4-pots that John very kindly gave me. And here they are, Hi-Spec 4-pot front brake calipers. I'm sure these cost an absolute fortune, brand new. And John was saying to me that he basically fitted these to his Cosy powered Mk2 Escort RS2000, and they weren't quite good enough, so he had to fit 6 pots. But yeah, massive thanks again to you, John. Really appreciate you giving me these front brake calipers for Esther. Now I'm pretty sure that these are a straight swap for M16 calipers. They don't run any sort of adapter brackets or anything. You can see that the lugs are just built into the caliper. These, interestingly, look like they've got EBC brake pads fitted as well. These are the green stuff ones. And interestingly, it looks like these need to run a banjo bolt for the brake pipe that attaches to the caliper. And yeah, this has got a braided flexi going into another braided flexi. I'm probably going to remove this one, and yeah, I'm forced to run this one because, as I say, it needs a banjo bolt. Now, one thing worth noting with Esther's brake system is that I've got .5 silicone brake fluid, and I'm pretty sure John would have run these with normal .4 brake fluid. The reason I don't run .4 is because .4 eats away at your paint, and these plastic reservoirs can sometimes weep a bit of fluid, and I don't want to ruin the paint on my bulkhead. And you can't actually mix the two types of brake fluid at all. So before I fit these to the car, I want to give them a decent clean out with the brake cleaner from my friends at Kent Europe. So let's cue some music, get these calipers cleaned up, and fit them straight to the car. I started dismantling the caliper by removing the flexi hose that I won't be using, and then I pulled out the little R-clips and slid out the pins that hold the brake pads in. Out came the Kent Europe brake cleaner to clean everything up, and then I realised that I'd be better off removing the bleed nipples and then flushing everything through. With Esther's steering turned to opposite lock, it was easier to get to the bolts that hold the M16 caliper to her front leg. The bolts go through this locking tab, and then they have these spacers which go in between the caliper and the front leg, which along with the spacers in the calipers mean you can run vented discs. I set about disconnecting the copper brake line from the flexi hose, and then I realised there was no free spinning fitting on the flexi hose attached to the 4-pot caliper, so I loosened the banjo bolt a little bit. But then after I removed the M16 caliper, I realised that I still wasn't going to be able to screw in the new pipe unless I completely removed it from the 4-pot caliper first. With the new pipe fastened to my old flexi, I could then reattach the other end of it to the 4-pot, and then it was time to see if we were going to need the spacers with this caliper. And as you can see, without the spacers, the caliper fouls on the disc. it should sit there, which it will with the spacers. I refitted the bleed nipples to the caliper, and then I realised that the brake line banjo fitting was on the wrong way round. As you can see here, it's an angled banjo fitting, and I'm guessing that's just to make sure that the brake line is angled away from the wheel to stop it fouling. So I removed the brake line and turned it round 180 degrees and screwed it back onto the caliper, but this caused a problem. As there were no free spinning fittings, it meant that the brake line ended up being twisted. Not ideal, but seeing as there wasn't any actual kinks in it, I just continued on with the job. With the bolts, locking tab and spacers in position on the caliper, it was time to get it bolted to Esther's front leg. Then I tightened the brake pipe up, gave everything a clean, and then it was time to fit the brake pads. I cleaned up the brake pad pins and I grabbed the Kent Europe copper lubricant and just put it on the side of the pads where they were going to slide within the caliper. The first pad slid in nice and easily, but the second pad wouldn't go in. So I loosened the caliper bolts back off, then slid in the second pad, and then reattached the pins and clips. And after a quick wipe to remove any excess grease, I retightened the caliper bolts and then gave everything a more thorough clean with the Kent Europe brake cleaner. And there you go, one side down and one to go. The Hi-Spec calipers definitely look more pretty than the old M16s, and they're considerably lighter as well. And just like that, the driver's side caliper is also now installed. I've actually managed to make this pipe not so twisted. I realised that I was basically able to screw this a bit, and yeah, it's made the angle of this pipe a lot better. And then I basically readjusted this so that the other flexi that was already fitted isn't at a weird angle. So yeah, that's really cool. And I had to turn this clockwise to do that, so you know, it's not like I've risked loosening this joint. If anything, I was tightening it. So yeah, all good. Pretty sure this isn't going to interfere with the wheel or anything. Now, to bleed these, there's actually 2 bleed nipples on each caliper. Now, I'd like to think that I haven't got much air in the system apart from here to here, especially considering that the way I had to do this meant that, you know, there was brake fluid, you know, dripping out of the brake line, right? When I disconnected my copper line, brake fluid would have been dripping out of here, and then I had to hook up this line and twist that on because the fitting on the end isn't able to freely spin. And then once I'd done that, you've got fluid running out of this line, and then I attached the caliper. So I'd like to think that because the fluid is always flowing this way whilst I was doing this job, there wouldn't be much air in the system. Also, although this reservoir here for the front brakes did empty, well, it almost emptied, so there was a tiny bit at the bottom. So it's not as if the whole front brake system got dry. Now, I have topped it up, and that's almost all of the .4 fluid that I've got. But when I check the brake pedal, it is seemingly nice and solid. Now, what I've done is I've asked my beautiful girlfriend Kat to come round and give me a hand bleeding it. I'm going to get Kat to just gently push the brake down and hold it, and then I'll just crack off one nipple, do it back up, crack off one nipple, do it back up, and then do the same around the other side, and hopefully that would have bled any air out of the system, which should in theory only really be in the caliper. I did do it a minute ago myself. I just pumped the brakes and then came around here and just cracked it off, and I did hear like a little hiss from each one. So in theory, if I keep doing that until I don't hear any more hisses, that should be all the air out the system. And look who's here. All right, job done, and I've sprayed a load of brake cleaner about just to make sure we haven't got any brake fluid over the discs or anything. What I noticed is when Kat pumps the pedal, you sort of carefully undo the nipple, and then it will sort of shoot out, which is obviously the air bubbles, and then eventually it will just run nice and slowly. If you crank it off too much, then it gets really messy. But I'm pretty confident that there's no air in this system now. Let's get the wheels on, get her back on the ground, and take her for a test drive, see if she feels any better under braking. All right, off we go to the gym, a bit later than planned because of the faff I had around the garage today with these brakes. But yeah, this gives us a first chance to test them out properly. When I tested them around the garage just after I finished packing up. The ground round there is really loose, and yeah, gave them a quick test, and the rear locked up, which I thought was strange. In my mind, I was thinking that I'd have to adjust the bias on my pedal box to put it towards the rear more, because these front brakes are now better, in theory, than the old ones. But yeah, it doesn't feel any more spongy than the .4 or the .5, sorry, brake fluid feels anyway. The .5 stuff can feel a little bit spongy. But yeah, once I gave it about 6 clicks on the bias adjustment towards the front, yeah, they seem like, you know, they lock up better than the M16s did. Now, I did only test it sort of, you know, braking from about 20 mile an hour. But yeah, the brakes now sort of all lock up together, so the bias is now roughly correct. And yeah, it seems like it locks up a bit better than it did with the M16. So far, these brakes do feel really good. Obviously, you know, I should really let them bed in and stuff. You know, I'm using the used brake pads with my used discs, and I do think that I should spend a bit more time trying to bleed them a bit better. I was conscious of time, so I didn't want to spend too long around there earlier bleeding them. But yeah, other than that, they did feel okay, and we'll test them now on the way to the gym and see what's what. One thing I was thinking about how I was expecting to have to add rear bias, but I actually have had to add front bias. I don't think, you know, necessarily because the front brakes are now better, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's how the bias is adjusted, right? Because you can change master cylinder sizes on your bias pedal box, and that can affect the bias. So I don't think the adjustment on the bias adjustment is to do with how good the brakes are. I think it's all to do with how much fluid they're sort of pushing. So because these are different calipers, maybe they have less fluid inside them. You know, they've obviously got 4 small pistons now rather than the 2 larger pistons in the M16. So yeah, but it's good that I've got the bias adjustment on my dash so that I can just literally adjust the front to rear brake bias, you know, on the fly, you know, trial and error. Yeah, see? The car wouldn't lock up like that with the old brakes, like from speed, nah. Like, with the old brakes, it used to stop, don't get me wrong, it wasn't sketchy, but it's not like I ever had to make a really, you know, bad emergency stop. So, but yeah, these brakes now just lock up. And that felt like it was front and rear locking up then, didn't it? Gonna get flat spots on my tyres from testing the brakes. Pulls a little bit to the left. That might be the alignment. Alright, we have made it to the gym, which means it's time for me to end this video. Got to send another massive thanks out to John for sorting me out these brakes. Really appreciate it. Really cool to fit an upgrade to Esther for once, rather than just dealing with problems. But we still do have a few problems to deal with, but I'll get round to it all. But yeah, if you thought this video was any good, as always, do give it a thumbs up and give it a share on your social media to spread the word about my channel. Feel free to check out the links in the description to my social media and my website. My email address is down there as well for anyone who wants to contact me. Don't forget to check out the Petrolhead Style website for really cool car themed products, and I'll leave a link to my website in the description as well. for anyone who wants to go and grab some official Marcus Hayes merchandise. But yeah, other than that, from me and my beautiful girlfriend Kat, thanks for watching.